I was driving home from the attorney's office when my phone buzzed with a text from my son. "Dad, we made dinner. Come straight home. We want to hear everything." I remember smiling at that message. 3 months earlier, he and his wife had moved into my house after their landscaping business collapsed under a pile of debt they never fully explained to me. I had opened my door because that is what fathers do. Now, sitting in rush hour traffic on Route 9 outside Montpelier, I thought about how good it would feel to finally give him real news, real hope, the kind of news that changes everything. I never imagined, not for a single second, that they already knew. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. It means more than you know. The phone call had come on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks earlier. I was in my workshop behind the house, sanding down a rocking chair I had been meaning to finish for 2 years. Retirement gives you projects like that. Projects you tell yourself you will get to, and then somehow 2 years pass, and the chair is still sitting there in raw pine, waiting. The workshop phone rang. I almost did not answer it. I wiped sawdust off my hands and picked up on the 4th ring. "Mr. Calloway? This is Patricia Aldridge, from Aldridge and Stern. I am calling regarding the estate of Margaret Calloway. Are you the brother of Margaret Louise Calloway, formerly of Burlington?" I set down the sandpaper and sat on the nearest stool. "Margaret, my sister. We had not spoken in 11 years. Not since our mother's funeral, where something was said in grief that should never have been said at all, and the silence that followed just kept growing until it became its own kind of landscape neither of us knew how to cross. She had never married, never had children, moved to Burlington and taught high school English until she retired. I knew this the way you know things about people you used to love and lost somewhere along the way. From mutual friends, from the occasional Christmas card that stopped coming eventually. "Mr. Calloway, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. What happened?" "I'm sorry to tell you this way. Your sister passed away 6 weeks ago. Cardiac arrest. At home. She was 71. She had named you as her sole beneficiary. I've been trying to reach you. The number we had on file was an old one." I stood up slowly. The workshop smelled like pine and sawdust and the particular cold of a Vermont November. I could hear my own breathing. I didn't know she was sick. She wasn't. Not in any way that showed, apparently. Her physician said her heart had been quietly failing for some time. She had known Mr. Calloway. She chose not to tell anyone. That sounded exactly like Margaret, private to the point of stubbornness. She would rather disappear quietly than ask anyone to grieve on her behalf. "We need you to come into the office to begin the estate process." Miss Calloway left a substantial estate. There is a property on Lake Champlain, appraised at $2.3 million, and an investment portfolio managed through a fiduciary that stands at $1.8 million. Combined, the estate is just over $4 million, all designated for you. She added a handwritten note to the will. "Would you like me to read it?" "Please." I heard paper shuffle. "For my brother Walter. You spent 32 years making sure the law meant something. I spent 30 years watching you from a distance and being proud of you without ever saying so. This is me saying so. Use it well." I had to put the phone down for a moment. 32 years on the federal bench. 3 decades of decisions that mattered, cases that kept me awake at night, verdicts I carried home and turned over in my mind until I was certain I had gotten them right. Margaret had watched all of it and never said a word. I picked the phone back up and told Patricia Aldridge I would be in her office the following Wednesday. I did not tell anyone, not my son, not his wife. I drove to Burlington alone, sat across from Patricia Aldridge in a narrow office with tall windows overlooking the street, and signed my name to documents that made me the owner of a lakefront property and an investment portfolio larger than everything I had earned in 32 years of public service. My hand moved through each signature slowly. I kept thinking about Margaret teaching teenagers how to diagram sentences. I kept thinking about the funeral, about the thing that was said, about how neither of us had been willing to be the one to walk it back first. I thanked Patricia. I scheduled a follow-up for the following week to discuss tax implications and property management. I drove the hour and 40 minutes back to Montpelier thinking about Margaret's handwriting on that note. On the drive home, I decided I would tell my son that evening. He and his wife had been living with me for 3 months now. He was my only child. His mother, my ex-wife Carol, had remarried years ago and was living out in Arizona. My son and I had always been close in the way that fathers and sons are close when they are both quiet people, not much said out loud, but steady. He had started the landscaping business 8 years ago, and for a while it had done well. Then it hadn't. The debts he described to me as bad investments had a way of growing slightly larger every time the subject came up. I had stopped asking for the exact number. Some things a father accepts without full accounting. I pictured telling him. I pictured his face opening up, the relief of it, the future unlocking. Maybe one of the Burlington properties Margaret had owned adjacent to the lake could go to him and his wife. Help them start clean. That was what I was thinking when I turned onto my street. My house sits back from the road, an old colonial with a wide front porch that needs repainting every 3 years, whether it wants to or not. The driveway curves slightly, which means I can see the lit windows before I reach the front walk. The dining room window on the left side of the house faces the driveway. I noticed, as I slowed to park, that my son and his wife were both at the dining room table, leaning toward each other in that posture people have when the conversation is urgent. I parked. I sat for a moment with the engine off. Something in the quality of that posture made me pause. After 32 years on the federal bench, you develop certain instincts about the energy in a room even before you enter it. I had seen enough witness preparation, enough courtroom theater, enough people performing calm to know what genuinely calm looked like and what was something else. I got out of the car quietly. The porch boards always creak at the second step, so I stepped over it from habit. The front window was cracked open an inch, the way my daughter-in-law preferred it because she claimed the house ran hot. I heard my son's voice first. She said it was over $4 million. All of it goes to Dad. A pause. Then his wife's voice, lower and faster. He doesn't know we know. He's going to come home tonight and act like he's sitting on some big surprise. Walter, listen to me. If we move now, before he has a chance to do anything with it, we can control this. I stayed completely still on the porch, the boards under my feet, the cold air coming off the yard. My car still ticking as the engine cooled. My son said something I could not make out. His wife's voice came back sharper. You remember what Dr. Hess said at Thanksgiving, about how your father has been showing signs, the forgetfulness, the way he repeats himself. Walter, it is not a stretch. You're his son. You know him. You know he's not the same. If we document it properly and get the right evaluation, we petition for guardianship. We get him declared incompetent. Then we manage the estate. All of it. My son was quiet for a long time. He's not incompetent, he said finally. He doesn't have to actually be incompetent. He has to look like he might be. There's a difference. I stepped back from the window. I walked to the far end of the porch and stood against the railing in the dark and breathed carefully. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A technique I had learned decades ago for the moments in a trial when something unexpected happened and you needed your face to give nothing away before you had time to think. 32 years on the federal bench teaches you certain things. The first is that emotion is information, not instruction. You feel it, you note it, you set it aside until you know what to do with it. The second is that the law does not reward reaction. It rewards preparation. The third is that the worst thing a judge can do, and the worst thing anyone in possession of important knowledge can do, is reveal that knowledge before it is tactically useful. I stood on that porch for approximately 4 minutes. Then I opened the front door and walked inside and said, "Something smells good." And my son looked up from the table and smiled and said, "Lasagna." And his wife said, "How did it go?" With that particular bright attentiveness, people deploy when they already know the answer to the question they are asking. And I said, "The estate is more complicated than I expected. It is going to take some time to sort out. I am not sure yet what any of it amounts to." My son nodded. His wife made a sympathetic sound and went to the kitchen to serve dinner. I sat down at the table I had eaten at for 21 years and talked about the drive and the weather and the lasagna, and I gave nothing away at all. That night I lay in bed for a long time without sleeping. I ran through what I had heard and what it meant with the same methodical care I had given to sentencing decisions. My daughter-in-law's voice. He doesn't have to actually be incompetent. He has to look like he might be. Dr. Hess. She had named a specific person. That was not abstract planning. That was logistics already in motion. I thought about my son's silence after her words. He had not agreed enthusiastically, but he had not refused, either. He had said, "He's not incompetent," which was the response of a man who was still being talked into something, not the response of a man who was saying no. I knew the difference. The next morning, I called an old colleague named Raymond Castillo. We had served together on the First Circuit for 11 years before he retired. He was 70 now and spent his winters in Vermont because he claimed the cold kept him honest. I had not spoken to him in 8 months. He picked up on the second ring. "Raymond," I said, "I need to talk to someone who has handled elder guardianship abuse cases." He paused. Then, "How bad?" "Bad enough that I am calling you at 7 in the morning." He told me to come over. I drove to Raymond's house in the neighboring town and sat at his kitchen table while he made coffee, and I told him everything. The inheritance, Patricia Aldridge's office, the porch, what I had overheard, the name Dr. Hess. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always respected about him. When I finished, he poured 2 cups and set one in front of me. "You know what they are describing as a felony," he said. "I know. Guardian fraud, possibly conspiracy. Depending on how far along the planning is, you might already have grounds. If this psychiatrist is involved in a scheme to fabricate a competency evaluation, that is a separate criminal matter entirely. License revocation, criminal charges." "I know." Raymond looked at me carefully. "Walter, are you all right?" I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and thought about my son's face at the dinner table the night before. The smile, the lasagna. "I will be," I said. Raymond and I spent the next 3 hours mapping out exactly what I needed to do. I needed documentation. I needed recordings, legally obtained under Vermont's single-party consent law, which allows a person to record conversations they are party to. I needed to let the scheme develop far enough to constitute overt acts, not just discussion. And I needed to contact the Vermont State Police Financial Crimes Unit, which Raymond knew personally through a former clerk now working in the Attorney General's office. I drove home in the early afternoon. My son's truck was gone. His wife's car was in the driveway. I had approximately 2 hours. I went to my home office and pulled out the small digital recorder I had used for 20 years of bench notes. I checked the battery. I placed it in the interior breast pocket of the cardigan I wore around the house every evening. I made sure the fabric did not muffle the microphone. Then I went to my workshop and actually worked on the rocking chair for 45 minutes, because routine was important and nothing about my behavior could change. Over the following 2 weeks, I built the record. My daughter-in-law was, it turned out, not particularly careful about what she said in the house once she believed I had accepted a fiction about her intentions. She liked to use the kitchen table for what she called planning sessions when my son came home in the evenings. She spoke quickly and with the particular confidence of someone who has decided that an obstacle is already removed. I sat in my armchair in the adjacent room with a book in my lap and the recorder in my pocket and listened to her describe, across multiple evenings, the mechanics of what she had designed. Dr. Hess was a psychiatrist in Burlington who had, according to my daughter-in-law, done evaluations for other families in similar situations. She said this with the ease of someone referring a plumber. My son would bring me to an appointment framed as a routine checkup, after which Dr. Hess would produce documentation of early-stage cognitive decline. That documentation would support a guardianship petition filed in Chittenden County Probate Court. Once the petition was filed, a temporary guardian could be appointed, giving them authority over my financial decisions while the case proceeded. At that point, my daughter-in-law explained, we move the accounts. She had a name for the account they planned to transfer the portfolio into. She said it out loud. I wrote it down later. My son, during these conversations, participated less than she did. He asked logistical questions. He did not generate enthusiasm, but he supplied it with his presence, which is its own kind of participation. Once, on a Thursday evening, I heard him say quietly, "What if he contests it?" And she said, without hesitation, "He'll be too confused by then. That's the whole point." I sat in my armchair and turned a page of my book. On a Saturday morning, when both of them had gone to the hardware store for something, I sat down with Raymond on the phone and read him 2 weeks of notes. He was quiet for a moment. "Walter," he said, "you have enough." "I know. Do you want me to make the call to the financial crimes unit?" "No. I will make it myself. I want to be precise about what happened next because I have thought about it many times since, and I believe the sequence matters." I called the Vermont State Police Financial Crimes Unit that Saturday. I spoke to a detective named Okafor, who had been briefed by Raymond's contact. I described the plan as I understood it. I told Detective Okafor about Dr. Hess. I offered to provide my recordings. He asked me if I was willing to continue letting the situation develop for a controlled period of time. I told him I was, on one condition, that when the moment came, it happened cleanly and completely, so that there was no opportunity for anything to be walked back or minimized. He said that was exactly how they intended to run it. We set a date for the following Wednesday. My son had told me, casually, over breakfast that morning, that he had made me a doctor's appointment because he had noticed I seemed tired lately. He said Dr. Hess came highly recommended. I looked at my son's face when he said this, and I saw the thing I had been trying not to see for 3 weeks. He knew exactly who Dr. Hess was. He was delivering lines his wife had written for him. And somewhere underneath that delivery was the person I had taught to ride a bike on the sidewalk outside this house 40 years ago. And those two things were existing in the same face at the same time, and I did not let any of that into my expression at all. I said, "That sounds fine." Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of Vermont December day that looks beautiful from inside a window and punishes you the moment you step out. My son drove. His wife stayed home. I sat in the passenger seat in my good overcoat with my recorder running in the breast pocket, and I watched the bare trees pass, and I thought about Margaret writing that note for her will and choosing not to tell me she was dying. I thought about a lot of things on that drive. Dr. Hess's office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building off Church Street in Burlington. The waiting room was pleasant, neutral colors, a fish tank. My son sat beside me and talked about nothing in particular with the careful cheerfulness of someone performing relaxation. When they called my name, he stood to come with me. "I prefer to go in alone," I said. He hesitated. "The doctor likes to have a family member present," he said. I looked at him for a moment. I said, "I have been going to doctors alone for 63 years, and I do not intend to change that today." He sat back down. I went in alone. Dr. Hess was 50-something with a practiced warmth that I recognized immediately as professional. He gestured to a chair across from his desk and opened a folder. We went through what he described as a standard cognitive assessment. He asked me the date, asked me to count backwards from 100 by sevens, asked me to remember 3 words and recall them 10 minutes later. I answered everything correctly. He made notes that I could not read from my angle. Toward the end of the appointment, he said, "Your son is quite concerned about you." I said, "I imagine he is." He said, "He has noticed some worrying changes in your behavior, memory lapses, disorientation, moments of confusion." He described an incident last week where you apparently became lost, driving home from the grocery store. "I have lived in Montpelier for 21 years, I said. "I have never once become lost driving home from the grocery store." He made another note. He said, "Sometimes patients are not aware of these episodes." I said, "Dr. Hess, I want to ask you something directly." He looked up. I said, "How many of these assessments do you conduct per year? And what percentage result in a recommendation for guardianship proceedings?" He went very still. I said, "And are you aware that this conversation has been recorded under Vermont's single-party consent law since I walked through your door?" The color changed in his face. I stood up and said, "I spent 32 years as a federal judge. I know exactly what you are doing, and I know exactly what it constitutes under Vermont law. I am giving you the professional courtesy of this warning before the next part begins." I walked out, nodded to my son in the waiting room, and said, "Let's go home." He was quiet in the car. I watched the bare trees going the other direction now, back toward Montpelier. My son drove with both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 the way I had taught him. About halfway home, he said, "How did it go?" I said, "About as I expected." We drove the rest of the way in silence. My house was lit from inside when we pulled in. His wife met us at the door. She looked at my son's face first, which told me she was reading him for the result, which told me she understood she was the one managing the outcome of this plan. I watched her recalibrate in the 2 seconds between looking at him and turning to me. "How are you feeling?" she said. I told her I was tired. I was going to make some tea and sit in my chair. She offered to make the tea, and I let her because I needed her in the kitchen. I went to my armchair. I sat down. I opened my book. From the kitchen, I heard her voice, quiet and taut. What did he say? What happened in there? Did Hess get what he needed? And my son's voice, I don't know. He didn't say much. Her voice again, lower. I'm calling Hess right now. I turned a page. 15 minutes later, she came out with the tea and set it on the side table beside me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. I thanked her. She sat on the couch and picked up her phone with the practiced casualness of someone who had just made a call they did not want me to know about. I drank my tea. At 7:45 that evening, Detective Okafor knocked on my front door. He came with 2 other officers and a colleague from the Financial Crimes Unit who had a warrant. My son opened the door because he was closer to it. He stared at the badge for a long moment, and in that moment I saw his face go through a process that I recognized the same process I had watched defendants go through for 32 years. When the weight of consequence finally became real, and there was no longer any doubt about the shape of the room they were standing in, my daughter-in-law appeared at the hallway door behind him. She looked at the officers. She looked at me in my armchair. And something moved through her expression that was complicated and fast calculation, assessment, the instant structural collapse of a plan she had believed in completely until 5 seconds ago. She looked at me one more time, and I held her gaze, and I did not look away. I stayed in my armchair while Detective Okafor explained the warrants. I watched my son's face during this. I want to be honest. There was a part of me that still looked for something there. Some flicker of the person who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my car on the way home from Little League games, who used to call me from college just to talk, who stood beside me at his grandfather's graveside and held my arm when I needed it. I looked for that person in his face while Detective Okafor spoke, and I found only fragments. Pieces of someone trying to hold together under the understanding that his father had known for 3 weeks, had built the case himself, had been sitting across from him at dinner and passing the bread and saying nothing while recording every word. He looked at me once, directly. I did not look away from that either. My daughter-in-law was taken to the station for questioning. My son was asked to come voluntarily, and he agreed. There was a separate matter involving Dr. Hess, who had already been contacted by the state medical board by the time they left my house. Raymond had made a few calls on that front. The house went quiet. I sat for a very long time after the cars left. The rocking chair I had been building was still out in the workshop, still in raw pine, still waiting. The kitchen light was on. Someone had left a cup in the sink. The ordinary details of a house that had held something complicated for the past 3 weeks and was now empty of it. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Aldridge. She did not answer, so I left a message telling her I was ready to move forward with the estate process and that I would need recommendations for a financial advisor and an estate planning attorney. I told her that I had some ideas about what I wanted to do with the Burlington property, that I had been thinking about setting up a scholarship in my sister's name at the high school where she had taught, and that I wanted to handle the rest of it carefully and correctly the way Margaret's note had asked me to. Then I sat there and did not do anything else for a while. I have thought, in the months since, about what my son's wife said. The evening I stood on the porch and first understood what I was hearing. He doesn't have to actually be incompetent. He has to look like he might be. I have thought about the casualness of it, the pragmatism, the way a human being who presumably once had ordinary values arrived at that sentence and said it out loud in a dining room in a house where someone else's furniture had been rearranged to accommodate them. I have thought about my son sitting at that table. He was charged with conspiracy and financial elder abuse under Vermont statute. His wife faced the same charges, plus additional counts, related to the solicitation of a fraudulent professional evaluation. Dr. Hess surrendered his license voluntarily before the board hearing concluded and pleaded no contest to charges that would follow him the rest of his professional life. My son received a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation based on partial cooperation and his attorney's argument that he had been a secondary participant operating under the influence of his wife's planning. I did not contest that characterization. I had heard the recordings. It was not inaccurate. I did not go to the sentencing hearing. His wife received 18 months. I am 63 years old. I live alone in a house in Montpelier that needs its porch repainted. I have an inheritance from a sister I failed to speak to for 11 years, and I spend some portion of most days thinking about what I would say to her if I could. The lake property in Burlington is being managed professionally while I decide what to do with it. The scholarship is in process. The investment portfolio is with a fiduciary Raymond recommended. My son has called twice. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times I listened to the message twice and then sat with the phone in my hand, not sure what I was waiting for. The second call was longer. He did not explain or excuse, which I had expected. He mostly talked about the summer we built the stone wall along the back property line, the two of us, when he was 16. He said he did not know why he was thinking about that. I knew why. I thought about it too. The rocking chair is finished now. It sits on the front porch where I can see it from the driveway when I come home. Pine weathers silver if you leave it without a finish, which I did not know before I built it. It looks a little like driftwood now, pale and smooth in the Vermont winter light, which is its own kind of beautiful. I put in a coat of oil last week against the freeze, and I sat in it for a while, in the cold, and watched the empty road and thought about 32 years of decisions, about Margaret typing a note on her will, about a 16-year-old with mortar on his hands asking if the wall looked straight, about the particular weight of victory when the cost of it has already been paid by the time you arrive at the winning. The law had worked exactly as designed. Evidence had been gathered. Charges had been filed. A corrupt professional had been removed from a position where he could harm people. That is not nothing. In 32 years, I had seen what happened when those mechanisms failed, and I understood what it meant that they had not. I sat in the silver chair in the cold, and I let both things be true at the same time, the way you have to when you are old enough to know that truth is rarely single. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe to Ember Vengeance. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from, and share your thoughts on this story. Your support means everything to us. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.